All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Event Leadership Institute webinar. We are here with an open house for the technical meeting and event production class. And next to me, we've got Brandt Krueger, the instructor for the course. Brandt is going to be talking about the course shortly, but here's the agenda for the webinar today. So we're going to start off with some very quick introductions. Brandt's going to talk a little bit about the course, and you'll have the opportunity to meet Brandt. And then we're going to leave you with some questions. For those of you that are joining us live and not watching the recording, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions about the course, about technical production, about the event industry, and so forth. So please do stick around to the end for the Q&A. All right, so a little bit about myself. I have actually been in the event industry for over 20 years. I used to own an event production company and then panicked when I had kids and decided to sell my business. I wanted to be there for the birth of my daughter. And then I ended up getting into academics. So I was an academic director, helped develop an event diploma program, and long story short, I am here now today combining my skills between business and event management and education to help further the education and professional development in the event industry. Brent will introduce himself shortly and tell you a little bit about who he is. But let's move on to who ELI is. So ELI has been around since about 2010. We provide an on-demand video library services. So there's a whole ton of classes that you can watch for about $25 a month or $250 for the year. And you can see all sorts of different courses. So do check out the membership option of what we offer. If you are a member, you also get a 20% discount on any of our professional development courses, certificate courses. So about the certificate courses, we do offer other ones, including the technical meeting and event production certificate. When you do complete the course, you will be able to receive a digital credential, which you can then post on your website or on LinkedIn to show that you have earned this knowledge as well. So a quick brief outline about the course. It's 5 weeks long. The next start date is June 25th. And if you do register and you are really interested in the course, I would strongly suggest that you register as soon as possible to save yourself a seat, but also you'll be able to save $100 if you sign up under the early bird pricing by May 28th. So do make sure that you do register by May 28th in order to save $100 on the course. And again, if you are a member, you do save 20% on the course, which is just a little bit more. And one thing too, if for those of you that are working towards your CMP, this course does carry 9 CMP hour credits that you can use towards your CMP certification. And again, you can earn your digital credential, but that's it for me. So I'm going to pass it off to Brandt Krueger, and he will tell you a little bit about himself, and I will come back at the end to give you a little bit of an opportunity to ask questions, and then we'll go from there. So ladies and gentlemen, with a big digital roaring round of applause, please welcome Brandt Krueger.
Hi, everybody. Well, it's a pleasure to be here as always, Mike, and to talk about this class. This class has been something that we've been working on for a while now. To tell you a little bit about me, basically, I'm 25 years old with 20 years of experience in the meetings and events industry, so I've been doing this thing for a while as well. I worked for a meeting and event production company out of Minneapolis for almost a good chunk of that 20 years. And have been out on my own doing freelance technical production, education, and consulting for about the last 5 years now. But before I'd even left that production company, I was starting to work with ELI regarding these types of classes. How do we make audiovisual and technology more accessible to planners? And so, this is something that we've been working on for a while, and has really been kind of a pleasure to put together for you guys. So that's kind of enough about, but enough about me. You can read more about my bio somewhere on site if you want to. Basically, what we did is we kind of took things, we broke them up a little bit. We tried to make it kind of an easier way in. with some of the easy stuff, and then kind of ease our way out with some of the bits and bobs that have come up over the course of the years. But the long and the short of it is we've got it down to 5 weeks. We deal with kind of visual content, projection, audio, lighting. We really break down the anatomies of audio, lighting, video control, staging, all of those kinds of things. We get into some of the more production-y type things, show management, speakers, virtual events, and of course, like I said, kind of ending up with the bits and bobs. Actually, how I got started with ELI was working on ways of making our presentations a little better, no matter what it was. So we kind of round out the class with presentation tips. So no matter what industry you're in, no matter what kind of speakers you've got, hey, here are the tips that we can do from a technical standpoint to make any old PowerPoint better. So kind of why we created this class, again, we wanted to make it accessible. We wanted to make it something that people could get into. A lot of times we hear people saying, you know, oh, I just don't have a technical mind, you know, but, you know, really what we've kind of looked at it is that it's just another language, right? It's another language that you might not be familiar with. And while we hear all the time people say, well, I'm not a techie, so I just don't know this techie stuff. You know, you never hear someone say, I'm not French, therefore I can't learn French. It's just another language, right? So it takes some time, and you don't need to go from like 0 to, you know, totally proficient in a language, right? Just if you're going to travel somewhere, just learn a little bit of the lingo, and it's going to go a long way, you know, right? Hello, goodbye, thank you, where's the bathroom, how do I order a beer? You know, the basics will really take you a long way in just about any country. So same kind of thing when it comes to AV, right? You don't need to know all the model numbers and all the physics of how light dissipates over distance, and why that affects projectors, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. You don't need to know all of that stuff. That's what your AV professionals are for. So we wanted to kind of come up with a non-technical approach to thinking about AV. How can we do this from a non-technical standpoint and give you enough knowledge that you're going to be comfortable asking questions, having conversations with your AV company, and be able to go, oh, that makes sense, or gee, that doesn't really make any sense, and ask the questions. Be comfortable having those conversations. You don't have to know it all. Just be comfortable enough to, you know, be a little bit more comfortable in your skin, so you're not worried that somehow you're going to get taken advantage of, or what are all these parts and pieces on my AV bid, and being able to ask the questions and be comfortable with the answers. We tried to make it kind of that Netflix style, right? Just a couple hours a week. It's not going to be something that's going to drain all of your time away, right? Event people are very busy people. I get it. You know, and every time we do the class, there's always someone that puts it off to the last possible minute and then tries to cram. Don't do that. You know, so you know, it's just a couple hours a week. You can do it a little bit over lunch, a little bit over dinner, you know, a little bit at night, a little bit in the morning. It's really kind of Netflix style, so you can binge it if you want to, but I would recommend not doing that. Don't try and do it all at once, either on the front end or on the back end. Really spread it out. Give yourself time to think about these concepts. Ask any questions that you might have along the way. So you can binge it all at once, but please, please, please don't try and do that. And then at the end, you've got the option to try and go for, you know, take the exam, get those digital credentials. And if you've been paying attention and you've been following along and doing all the little assessments that we have along the way, you'll do fine at that. And you'll walk out with those digital credentials. So let's get into it. Here's what we're going to be talking about in the class, starting right out with week 1. Like I said, week 1, we kind of softball things a little bit, and we get started with, go ahead, Mike. You know, so we're going to softball and roll into, you know, kind of the most typical stuff that you walk into in a meeting. You know, at a most basic level, when we talk about audiovisual, right, we're talking about usually someone who's got to present something. So even if we're not talking about lights and microphones, we're talking about walking into a room with a laptop, and how do we hook that laptop up to a display or to a projector. So we kind of go into the basics of laptop and desktop presentation software. So, you know, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be PowerPoint, but we're seeing a lot more Keynote as Apple has grown in in the business world. We're seeing a lot more of those options. We're talking about some of the online presentation software that started to show up, as well, things like Google Docs, as well as a lot of lesser known ones that are out there. And then with the proliferation of smartphones and tablets, we're seeing more and more people wanting to walk into a room and present directly from an iPad, especially executives, right? They just say, hey, I can do Keynote on my iPad. How do I do that? Make it go with just my iPad. So we'll talk about some of the tablet presentation options that are out there, and then some of the basics of, okay, how do we actually connect those devices to projectors? So connector cables, whether it's a PC or a Mac, what are those little dongles called? Why are they dongles, and what do they do, and all of those kinds of things. The basics of, just the different types of video connectors that are out there. That starts to lead us then in, okay, great. We've got our presentations. We need to be able to play back. Usually there's the number one question that the AV folks are always going to ask is, do you have any video in your presentation? So the different types of video playback that are out there, whether that's some kind of dedicated hardware playback, which we're saying less and less and less and less of, but for a while it was these dedicated boxes that would have to ingest the video, and then you'd be able to play it back. It was the kind of stuff that was being used in TV trucks, for instant replay and things like that. But more and more often now, what we're seeing is software playback, right? So a really big, beastly Mac, although they don't have to be that big and beastly anymore. The technology has come really far. Running some kind of dedicated software program like Presentation Pro. What is that? And how does it work? Or, the basics of, do you just embed the video into your presentation? And we talk about some of the pros and cons that come along with that. One of the biggest questions out there is internet access, and it's something that comes up over and over and over in the class, right? Because it's something that it's getting better as far as where we can get it and how we can get it, but the pricing is still all over the map, and can go anywhere from expensive to really expensive. So we talk about, do we need to have internet access for our presentations? How to handle it, what to ask your speakers, and when to avoid it. And then we touch on briefly some of the remote control options that are out there, the ability to run your presentation from another device. And maybe sometimes that's what we're talking about when we say we want to run something from an iPad. Really they just want to be able to look at their notes or something along those lines. From there, we go into projectors. We talk about some of the basics of projector technology. Again, we're not getting too deep into this stuff, but we do talk about, the definitions of what are lumens and how many do you need? And that's a lot more complicated question than maybe you need to be getting into, but we get into the basics of it. The lumens, the lenses, the different types of projectors that are out there. What's the difference between LCD and DLP and 3LCD and laser and all of these different technologies? And what does it mean for your events? So that when you see, an LCD projector on a bid versus a DLP projector on a bid, what does that mean for you? We talk about some of the basics of rear screen and front screen projection. And I'm just going to pause there for a second, because this is something that comes up as we're going through this, and you're kind of thinking about, okay, I would like to learn more about that. Okay, I know all there is to know about that, and I would like to learn more. These are the types of things that come up. Almost everything that's in this class is something that's come up. And so when we talk about, what you need to keep in mind when we talk about rear screen or front screen projection, it might be obvious to you, but it's also the kind of thing where I've seen really, senior level planners who've had a lot of experience in this world making very simple mistakes when it comes to, rear screen projection or front screen projection, or where do we keep stuff and projector sight lines and things like that. So if it seems like something, oh, well, I know all there is to know about that, just keep an open mind and you might learn something along the way. From there, we go into stacked projection, like what happens when you take a projector and put another projector on top of it, the benefits of doing that versus having, a spare projector that's in a case somewhere in the back room, just in case. We talk about some of the not politics, but some of the things that go around having a backup projector versus a stacked projector. I have some opinions on that as far as how you should be dealing with that when it comes to your bids. And then screen and drape kits, right? So not just putting a screen in a room, not just ordering a screen in a room. Again, one of those things that sounds super basic, but making sure you're watching out for ceiling heights and, how much the width is and how much the height is when it comes to not just, those kind of traditional fast fold screens, but also the drape and stuff that goes around it. From there, we get to go into one of my favorite topics, and whenever I get an opportunity to talk on it, speak about it, I certainly take it. So it was only natural that I would include it in my class. And that is when we're talking about projection and display technology, we have to digress a little bit and talk about projection mapping. And before you go, wow, this is something I can't afford, this is something that they do on the side of casinos and in giant venues like that, we talk about what it is, how it works, and I really hopefully can break it down in a way that's going to make you go, oh, this is something we might be able to do, in our events, and something that we can do on a budget. So we definitely go into not only what it is and how it works, but possible use cases in events that aren't necessarily events that have million-dollar budgets. Kind of rounding out week one, we've got flat screen displays. We talk about the differences, that much like projectors, right? It's kind of an alphabet soup where we've got LCD versus plasma versus LED LCD and all of the various different types out there. We also get into the fact that there's really no set configuration, right? Because we've moved away from these things being professional models to, the kinds of things that you can go and get at your local big box store. So there's no guarantee as to what the type of inputs there are. There's no guarantee as far as how many inputs there are. So we just talked through some of those things that you need to know when you're ordering flat screen displays, some of the best use cases, and then what's the difference between like a flat screen display, like an LED flat screen display, and then an LED wall, the different types of technology that are involved in those two very different things that frequently get confused. Some people will think that that's similar technology, and they really aren't. They're very two different use cases, and so we talk through some of that. How to choose the right display, what's going to be the right display for you and your events, and kind of rounding out the display and projection, we talk about IMAG, right? What do we do when we're putting up someone's image on a screen? And what does IMAG mean? And what do you need to do when you consider doing IMAG? And then each one of these sections we like to conclude with a who runs the gear section. And we just kind of use that as an opportunity to talk about what do you call the person that does this? And what do you call the person that does that? And what are their general responsibilities on the production team? Is it the projectionist? Is it the person who's, whether it's audio or video and all those kinds of things? We have those little who runs the gear sections. And that's it for week one. Again, we're kind of easing you in a lot of the stuff that maybe you already know a little bit about, real basic level breakout session type stuff. Then we start getting into the heavy stuff. So week two, audio and lighting. And we're going to start with audio. So the audio side, we're going to really start to break down the anatomy of a sound system, right? And so it's easy to look at these sound systems that they have on, on the big shows with all the buttons and faders and all that kind of stuff and go, man, my head's going to explode. I could never, know any of that stuff. But the nice thing is that sound systems, whether they're tiny little breakout room sound systems or a speaker on a stick, all the way up to a giant festival or something along those lines, they're all basically the same things. You're going to have a certain number of inputs, and whether those inputs are microphones or some kind of audio or music or something along those lines, you're going to have a mixer of some kind so that you can adjust the levels. You're going to have a certain number of outputs. We're going to send some signal to the speakers in the room. We're going to send a different signal to the internet feed where people are watching online, and then you're going to have the speakers, all of those kinds of different things. So we can break down a small sound system and then scale that up. And so that's what we do in the class. We talk about what does it look like with a small sound system. We talk about what counts as an input, what counts as an output, so that you're able to know, what do I need? Do I need a 12-channel board, a 24-channel board? These are terms that we throw out a lot in AV. So what does that mean when we say a 12-channel board and a 24-channel board? What are the different types of microphones that are out there? All of those kinds of things, all kind of contained in that. We go into the amps and the speakers and the different types of speakers that are out there, speakers on a stick versus delays and fills. What happens when we've got a really wide stage? Do we need to fill that in a little bit? What is that called? Line array speakers, which are those kind of curved ones that you can see there versus, hey, I don't need a sound system. They've got them mounted in the ceiling. So we talk about kind of the pros and cons of each of the different types of speakers that are out there, as well as a lot of the other random gear that you see backstage, amplifiers and all of this kind of stuff. What is it and what do you need it for? Again, then we kind of round out that section with the who runs the gear, the A1, the A2, what are their responsibilities as far as the production team goes. And whenever possible, we did try to include some kind of hot tips, right, for each of these sections. So if you do get pressed into service and have to place a lavalier microphone on someone, here are kind of the best microphone placement tips that we've got, as well as things like, money saving tips like wireless combo packs. Do I need a handheld microphone and a lavalier microphone, or can I use a single combo pack? What is a combo pack and how does that work? From there, sorry, my throat's getting a little dry today. Welcome spring. We go into the lighting system. Now, the reason that I like to start with the audio system is it's got a very nice flow to it, right? We go from the microphone into the mixer, out of the mixer, over to the amplifiers, into the speakers. And if you're able to kind of get through the audio, the anatomy of a sound system, all of the rest of these systems kind of follow the similar pattern or are actually easier and have less parts and pieces. So once we kind of get through audio, we move on to lighting. And in lighting, then, instead of talking about inputs and microphones and things like that, we're talking about what needs to be lit. So functional items versus decorative elements. What does that mean when we're talking about what needs to be lit? In addition to what needs to be lit, a lot of times we're lighting things in different ways, right? So not just the what, but how, and how many different types of looks that there are. Because just like, how many microphones and things impacts what kind of audio mixer you have, what you need as far as things that need to be lit and the number of different ways that they need to be lit is going to impact the lighting console. What kind of lighting board you're going to need for your event. Is it going to be just a simple like fade up, fade down, or are there going to be awards and videos and all this kind of stuff going on in between? And we want to have different looks for each speaker and all that kind of stuff. That's going to impact directly the type of equipment that you need. We're going to talk about the different types of lighting instruments that are out there and the argument of what is the difference between light versus instrument. That's another one of those kind of podium versus lectern type things, which I will save the spoilers on my feelings on that for the class. You'll just have to watch to find out. So there's light versus instrument, the types and uses of the different types of instruments that are out there, whether it's Lekos or par cans or LEDs, pin spots, follow spots, all of those various different types of instruments that are out there, as well as all of the accessories that go along with them, right? What is a gobo? What are gels? What are barn doors? And why do I need them? And then we get into a little bit of, the more modern side of lighting, which is intelligent lighting. And what are the different types of lights that are available there when it comes to intelligent lighting? Lighting, more than a lot of the other things, has some very specific logistics around it, right? Because more often than not, we're up in the air, we're hanging things from truss or on light trees and things like that. So we kind of take a step back and look at some of the considerations when it comes to logistics specific to lighting. The location of the lighting console, right? A lot of times we can place our AV crew backstage or behind stage or on the side, but lighting people really like being, in the very back of house in specific locations, and they need access to all the power runs and things like that so that they can actually control that lighting. The power that's involved in lighting and how small things like, moving something on stage a couple feet to the left can really create a domino effect that can mess with your timelines of when you can get set up, especially once you've got tables and chairs down and you're dealing with house versus ladders and lifts and all that kind of stuff. And then once again, rounding out with who runs the gear, who have we got that's running the lighting lighting console, who's doing the actual plugging in and all that kind of stuff. And that rounds out week 2. A nice, heavy duty audio and lighting section. Week 3, we start going into some of the other things as far as, we kind of touched on projectors and lumens and lights and that kind of stuff. So now that we've learned the audio system, we've learned the lighting system, I kind of round back on video switching. So we talk about, again, the same types of things: video signal flow, the number of inputs, the number of outputs, and the importance of these things when making sure that you're getting the right equipment. And that's something that we emphasize repeatedly in this class, is, again, we're hopefully empowering you to have these conversations with your AV company early on so that you're able to get the right equipment that you need on site. And there's avoiding those last minute budget busting, oh man, we need a bigger soundboard, we need a bigger light board, we need a bigger video switcher because we didn't take into account X, Y, and Z. So once again, we're talking inputs, we're talking outputs, what it constitutes an input, what's good, what's an input, what isn't an input, and the signal flow as we go through the video switching system. From there, we start getting into some of the more production-y things. We go into staging terminology. This is another one of those, I know stage left versus stage right, but a lot of people don't, right? So we make sure that everybody's clear, we're all on the same page when it comes to what is stage left, stage right, upstage, downstage, all of that kind of stuff. We touch on staging is one of those things that's so specific from event to event, and it really depends on what you need for that specific event. So we just kind of touch on the basics of how do you determine how big, the things you need to keep in mind that are often forgotten by planners as they're going through the process. And just to touch on, again, some of the various types of stage decking. There's a million different types of stage decking, but we kind of touch on the most common hotel, maroon carpeted stuff that's out there that can be rolled around, as well as moving up and down the scale from there. Further things about logistics, things to think about, right? Case storage, green rooms, the order of load in and setup, right? So we've got to get the stuff from the truck into the room, and then we got to lay out all the truss, and the truss got to go up, and then we got to, so there's a very specific order that's going to help you organized, getting people in and out of the room in a timely manner, in an efficient manner, so you don't wind up with a crew of 15 sitting around waiting while somebody else is still finishing up. So you're able to get that schedule going of the order of load in and setup. A little touch on safety and aesthetics, things like wrapping cables and wrapping cords and cord ramps, just making sure that we're doing this in a safe way and in a way that's going to look good. And then that brings us into crew breaks, so being able to say, okay, folks, take 5, we want to make sure that we're getting breaks, we're getting plenty of water, we're, having our lunch and dinner breaks. And that kind of transfers us into a little bit deeper discussion about working with labor. Labor is one of those things that's different all over the world. It's different even sometimes in the same city from venue to venue. So we talk about some of the more commonalities, especially in United States and Canada and other North American destinations. But a lot of these rules and regulations have very similar types of things. And even if it's not a regulation or a law, they're just kind of guidelines that are followed quite a bit all over the world. So if you're learning this and if you're not from the US or Canada, there's still a lot to be gained from this section talking about working with union labor. Things like when they have to walk away breaks, things like overtime, what does and doesn't count as overtime. And one of the biggest budget busting things around there, turnaround time. And it's one that a lot of people don't know about. So we go into what is turnaround time and how does it work. We talk a little bit about venue and site selection, and that's something that a lot of planners are very familiar with. And there's, really qualified even services, things like Helms Briscoe that are, going to, try and help you find those things. What we talk about in this section is what do I look at? What do I look like? You can see what I look like. What do I look at when we're, when we're on a site visit from a technical standpoint? So, instead of getting blinded by, oh my goodness, this hotel has amazing views and an amazing spa and the food is incredible. What do we look at from a site selection standpoint, from a technical standpoint. Things like where are the outlets and availability of circuits? What are the power charges? How do venues charge for power? What are rigging points and why am I getting charged for them? Internet access, again, right? How is internet access being charged for? The availability, the fees, and then we talk, about the negotiation of each of these sections, and we talk about some of the things that you can use to help negotiate things like power charges, rigging charges, internet access, all of those things. We also want to give you some tools regarding how to choose the right AV provider. There's a lot of different options, and I'm not one of those guys that says, oh, you got to use a third party, the in-house, they're so expensive and blah, blah, blah. There's a time and a place for each model, right? There's different types of suppliers out there. There's pros and cons of each one of them. We really dive into the pros and cons of the in-house model, the pros and cons of the outside AV model, the pros and cons of hiring a full-on production company. And we even touch on a little bit the pros and cons of doing it yourself and some of the benefits that you can gain from that and some of the things that you're probably not thinking about when you say, oh, I'll just handle it. This is one, where we got a lot of feedback from folks saying, can you just give us some more tips and tricks when it comes to power and internet? So we bundled up an extra little section of, here are some things to keep in mind when you're dealing with power. Here are some things to keep in mind with internet and some of the negotiating techniques that can surround those things. That rounds out week 3 into week 4. I'm going to try and move this along so we leave some time for Q&A at the end. Week 4 is just kind of miscellaneous production stuff. So we kind of talk about speaker management, some of the tips and tricks that are around there. We go into what I look for when creating a show flow. Again, I'm only 25 years old, but I have 20 years of experience in AV. So I've kind of taken the things that I think work well as far as being a show caller and giving just the right amount of information to your AV staff. We talk about who the various people are on the production team. This is one of those things that's very different from city to city, country to country, what we call those people. I've kind of landed on, okay, these are what I think they should be called, and I'm recommending that that's what you should call. At the very least, people would understand who you're talking about if you use this terminology in the way that I'm suggesting. They're not going to be confused and think you're talking about something else. Part of the problem is that we have a lot of people in our industry. Some people came from television, some people came from theater, some people came up directly into corporate events. And so depending on where you've come from, you might have different terminology about who does what. But more importantly, not getting hung up on necessarily those names, but whatever you call them, those roles still exist. So being sure that someone's in charge of this, in charge of this, in charge of this, and in charge of this. We talk about what might happen in case I get hit by a bus and you have to call the show. So suddenly you have to put on the headset and you're the one calling the standbys and the goes. What would happen? A little bit about headset etiquette, right, as well. So if you are the client and you're the one on either calling the show or for some reason you have to be on headset, what is the etiquette that kind of surrounds using those kinds of comm systems? We do a little section on teleprompters. This is one of those things that I have seen some epic fails when it comes to teleprompters, and probably you have too. If you haven't had a chance to look up the Michael Bay teleprompter fail, do yourself a favor and look that one up, because it really shows you the importance of knowing why to use a teleprompter, how they work, when to use them, and maybe when not to use them. So you should really prepare your presenters for using teleprompters. Build in some extra rehearsal time, build in some extra budget time, for teleprompters. So knowing when to use them and when not to use them. Another one of those things that we added on by special request is talking about hybrid and virtual events, right? So what happens now when we want to take our event to the next level and we want to bring in an external audience, bring in a remote audience? So again, how does it work? When should we use it? When shouldn't we use it? Enabling kind of those technical best practices. What are the things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to have some kind of a remote audience? How do we keep that audience engaged, right? Over the course of the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about how do we keep our in-the-room audiences engaged. Great. How do we now extend that to the remote audience? How do we keep them engaged? And then we also kind of deal with the myths of, okay, am I going to cannibalize my live event if I somehow start having a hybrid audience or a virtual audience? And I'll spoiler alert on this one. No, it's not. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. Finally, week 5, here we go. We're in the home stretch, right? So week 5, again, these are a lot of the things that I kind of started with when I first started looking at our how do we make our meetings better? And a lot of ways that we could do that. And I think this is where a lot of that, death by PowerPoint stuff comes from, is that there was an awful lot of really awful presentations out there. But the problem is there's all these books saying, oh, don't use this font or this, this type of font and this size. And that doesn't really work depending on the size of your screen, right? So if I have a really tiny font, but I have a really big screen, that, I might be able to actually read it. So you kind of have to bear a lot of these things in mind. So I tried to come up with kind of my top, how do I take any old PowerPoint presentation, whether it's on, a keynote speech or it's something that's really technical, like the stuff that we present in this class. How do we try and keep that as interesting as possible, as nice looking as possible, as legible as possible? So we go into things like aspect ratios, whether it's the old 4:3 or the 16:9, we still run into that to this day, right? Problems with people having the wrong size presentations. Transitions, how do we have nice smooth transitions, all of that kind of stuff, all of those nice pro tips. We talk about internet access again, right? How do we keep keep an eyeball on our internet access when it comes to presentations, the legibility, brightness and contrast and resolution, design guidelines, really, again, all of the stuff that I've kind of picked up over the course of my career that's going to make any presentation, no matter what the content, better, as well as a quick section on who runs the gear. We then got into another one of those bonus sections that people really wanted to learn more about. They're like, why are these graphic types so confusing, whether it's print graphics or video graphics? And how do I know what resolution do I need? And is it a PNG versus a JPEG versus an MPEG versus an MP4? All of these different things that are out there, another alphabet soup, right, of things that are out there. So I always, whenever things are really confusing like that, I try to take a little step back and I actually go into, okay, this is why this came to be. This is why we have so many different file formats out there and what the different types of file formats are and why you can't just say, I needed an Illustrator file. Why you can't just say, I need a JPEG. You need to really know what you need, what kind of resolution it is, whether it's for print, whether it's for video, all of these different formats that are out there, bitmap versus vector, resolutions, DPI, how big does it need to be? And then kind of finishing up on the different types of color spaces that are out there. Maybe you've heard of Pantone, the Pantone color of the year. What does that mean when we're talking about Pantone colors versus things like process colors? All right, and that's how we round out week 5. I'm going to take a good long sip of my beverage as my throat seems to have gone completely dry. I guess that's just part of spring here in Minnesota.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Brent, for the great information about what to expect in the course, especially with spring season and allergies and all that fun stuff. So there we go. All right. So what we'd like to do now is we want to open it up to you and open it up to questions. So if you take a look at your GoToWebinar control panel, for those of you that are joining us live, please go ahead and start entering your questions there. It could be about tech production. It could be about the course, what we're happy to answer those questions for you. Just a reminder too that the course actually begins on June 25th, so make sure that you register also before May 28th because our early bird pricing ends on May 28th, so you'll be able to save $100 on the registration. All right, so we've got a question that's coming in from Lanedra. As someone with no experience in event production, do you feel this course will suffice for the exam digital credentials? So I would assume you're talking about the digital credentials within this course.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so put simply, the exam that we've put together is totally based on this course. So if you take your time, go through it. If you have problems with the in-course assessments, go back, take a watch, listen, watch, learn. It's absolutely something that if you're paying attention and working and doing well in the assessments week to week, you'll do great on the final exam.
Yep. I mean, it's just like any course. I mean, the more effort that you put into it, the more that you're going to get out of it. So you could be in a master's program, and if you decide not to do very much with your knowledge and do the bare minimum, then that's really what you're going to get out of it. So we do encourage you. One of the things that we do offer here, this isn't just simply an online course that you're watching a video and then walking away. Brent is answering questions throughout the course. We're also here. Our team at ELI is available, so you can also reach out to me if you have any questions throughout the course, whether it's about industry, careers, technical production. I'm happy to answer those questions as well. But then again, if we're looking back at the course, really making sure that you go through the information and learn it, and then when you're on site at your own events, take the time to work with your audiovisual professional to put into practice what you've learned. Start talking the lingo. I think back to Brandt's example at the beginning about speaking French. You could learn French, you could read all about French, you could listen to all the audio recordings about, I was going to say audio tapes, but nobody does audio tapes anymore. So so you can listen to all the audio recordings about how to speak French, but until you're actually going to speak it yourself, you're really not going to learn how to speak the language. You're not going to learn how to understand the language. So those that really succeed are the ones that are actually immediately putting into practice what they're learning and starting to speak that language. All right, so we get another question here from Megan. Sometimes we become the AV controller or troubleshooting rep when we do not have supported on-site staff. Does this course cover an in-depth dive into mixer, troubleshooting, etc.? Or do you guys offer something more customized or similar to the support setup and fixing of AV?
So to the first side, yes. Like if you're following along and you're able to understand kind of the anatomy of a sound system, that was kind of my goal, is that if you get hard pressed and you have to run into a breakout room or something and adjust the levels or do some kind of emergency adjustment on the soundboard, you should be able to do that, yes. To the second side, it's not meant to be a full-on introduction to audiovisual, right? It's meant to be you're a planner, you're an event person who AV is not your primary job, and you're not planning on making it your primary job. It's designed to be a 101 course so that you're able to have constructive conversations with people whose job it is. So it's definitely not comprehensive in that aspect, but it's comprehensive is in the sense that it's meant to be an absolute baseline for being able to have educated conversations.
Yeah, and that being said too, Megan, one of the things to realize is the first step would be learning the language too.
Yeah.
And so once you learn the language from the course and you know what all the things are, at that point, let's just assume that you've got an audiovisual company that drops off a bunch of gear for you to use, and then that's all they're doing. They're not supporting you throughout the event. Once you learn the language, what I would strongly suggest is when that AV supplier drops off all the equipment, get them to show you exactly what you need to do, talk to them throughout the process. In fact, I've known some planners that have actually gone and volunteered with AV companies just so that they can learn. They've loaded gear, they've helped plug in equipment. Once you start to learn that stuff, it's not really as complicated as it sounds, or at least the basics aren't. So again, it's what you put into it. So I would say starting by learning the language. We don't have a more customized program. Maybe that's something that we could look at creating in the future. We do some on-site training. So if you're interested, we do group training. I'm not sure exactly where you're located, but if you can gather a bunch of people together and we could create a custom program for you that is more hands-on, that talks about the language, but also shows you how to operate some of the equipment as well. But that would be more of a customized program. But we would need to make sure that it's group. Otherwise, doing a one-on-one session with you might be a little more, a little less affordable. So hopefully that answers your question, Megan. I see, let's see here. So Megan is adding on, I'm a planner, but association planner. So we wear multiple hats, including running our own AV, troubleshooting. I'm interested in a group training at our facility. Thanks. All right, sounds good. So Megan, if you can reach out to me, my email address is mike@eventleadershipinstitute.com. Happy to talk about that. Maybe we can put together a group training at your facility for that specifically. So if you can, in the email, just let me know where you're located, what the name of the association is, how many people you're thinking. We can go from there as well. So that's mike@eventleadershipinstitute.com, and I'll get back to you for sure. We've got another question here from Lanedra. Once the course is over, will we have access to view the course over time, and is there a textbook or resource book needed? No, there's no textbook or resource book needed as part of the course. Everything that you need is all already online within the course itself, primarily video that you were watching with Brent. Access to view the course over time. The course access ends 2 weeks after the course, so you have 2 extra weeks. However, what I would recommend that you look at doing is becoming a member of ELI, which is again $25 a month, because what that does is give you access to all of the other technical production videos that we have within our library. And so for the $25 a month, you can have access to all of that stuff anytime you want as you're a member. What I would suggest is while you're taking the course, make sure that you are either taking notes or that you're writing down key points of what you want to keep as far as your knowledge, just like you would in any course as well, just so that you can make sure you retain it. But again, it's coming back down to what we were saying earlier, is make sure that you start to speak the language, talk to AV suppliers, hang out with the AV techs at your event so that you can get to learn and know these things. I find a lot of planners are afraid to even go up to the techs and talk to them, because it's almost like, I don't know the language, I don't want to look stupid. You're not going to look stupid by wanting to learn. If anybody makes you feel stupid for asking the questions, then you need to find a different AV supplier, because all the good AV suppliers, they love to teach and they love to have planners that know what they're talking about. So if you're asking the questions, you ask them to teach you some more information, the better. But this course will help you get a head start in that and get the language started that you need. So at least where to find the bathroom.
Yeah, and when I was first starting out with these classes, there were people at the production company that I used to work for who were like, "What? Why you're giving away all the secrets? Why would you want to do that?" But the vast majority of people, both in that company and in other AV companies, just like Mike said, are more than happy to explain why things are the way they are, how things work. They want to have that conversation, because a more educated consumer means that you're both able to make sure you get what you need on event day, and nobody's scrambling, and nobody's trying to find something, or have something brought over from the warehouse. So it makes for a better event all around if you have this ability to have these conversations. So any AV company that's worth its salt is going to be able to have these conversations, answer your questions in a way that makes sense. And if they don't, it is absolutely a red flag. So if they're making you feel stupid for asking a question, or you ask, hey, what is this piece of equipment, and they give you a mile-long technical explanation and can't do it in a way that makes sense, that's a red flag right there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I don't see any more questions that have come in, so I will do a last call for questions. If you do have any questions, we'll do a last call right now, so make sure to get your question in. In the meantime, up on the screen here, you'll see our email address and phone number. If you do think of a question after the fact or need any help with your registering for the course, you can send an email to info@eventleadershipinstitute.com, and one of our team members would be happy to assist you and answer those questions for you. You can also give us a call at the number that you see on the screen there too, and one of our team members will be happy to help you out. And I don't see any more questions that are coming in, but again, I do applaud you for taking the time out of your day to learn about this course, because professional development in our industry is really, really important to the growth and development of our industry, and it only makes us a better profession and really helps strengthen the industry by getting more knowledge and training as well. So again, don't forget to register before May 28th because the early bird pricing does end then, and then the course itself will start on June 25th. And that is all for today. I don't see any more questions. So again, any more questions after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out, info@eventleadershipinstitute.com, and we shall hopefully see you soon. So thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time today. Thank you very much, Brent, also for your time today.